Jesus in My Life, episode 66.
I'm sitting out there and I'm looking up and just going, Lord, I don't know what's going on in my life right now. I feel really lost and alone, but I know you're still there. And so I know at some point you're going to bring me back, because it was pretty dark place where I was. And in time, the Lord brought me back.
Welcome to Jesus in My Life, a podcast with Rob and Jack, where we interview everyday people like me and you about their extraordinary experiences with our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Welcome to another episode of Jesus in My Life. My name is Rob and my co-host Jack.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, as always, we jump right into it without any hesitation. Really excited about who we have in studio today. I just love when it comes to God's big family, his church, and how it gets sometimes overwhelming, but it's the phrase, the world is actually at the end of the day pretty small. And that's the way it is with God's family and especially when he connects us, because, that's what God does. It's a divine connection, oftentimes relationally. And like we meet for the first time and it feels like we've known each other forever, right? And so our friends today, we have Steven and Erin in studio today. And Jack and I are a part of a church here in Northern California, a small faith community, a family. And recently God drew Steven and Erin into our family, and it was like an immediate connection, and just exciting and excited to have our audience, have you guys listen to their story, because we jumped right on it and said, we got to get your story on the podcast. And so with all that said, welcome to the show, Steven and Erin.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've been married for how many years? 20?
We just celebrated our 25th.
25th.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Always look to the wind. That's good.
And we've been together for
7 years beyond
7
that.
years
Yeah.
on that. So 32 years. Whoa. Wow. Okay. Anyways, it's gone. It's a blur, but a lot of stuff happened in that blur. So I guess I can start out with my testimony.
Yeah, that'd be great. You beat me to the question.
Brief thing. Yeah. I lived in Southern California during the hippie days. I was raised in the Episcopal Church. So I had that kind of a background in the back of my head because I was an altar boy and all of that. So I had a basic knowledge of Christianity and Jesus. Didn't know him, didn't have any interest in knowing him. I left when I was 13 and just lived a normal Southern California life. I served, lived in Buena Park, and went to high school, graduated from high school in 1967. So in, 1966, 65, 66 is when the hippie thing kind of started going. And that really appealed to me. Peace, love. And at the beginning, like almost all movements, it's pure. And so I was really drawn to that. And I wasn't involved in taking drugs or anything like that until a little farther on. But I would go to love-ins and all of this stuff. So I had that interest. So eventually I got introduced to smoking marijuana. I was still in high school at the time. My senior year, kind of really got into it. Never before school or anything like that, but it was kind of a recreational thing. So I would go to love-ins and all of that. And, I really thought the hippie movement and the youth revolution and all of that, would make a change, hated the establishment and grew my hair out and all of that stuff. And during the process of doing all that, I did a lot of drugs at that time. I went from marijuana to doing LSD, and then I actually used to shoot speed, methamphetamines and stuff like that. So, I was pretty into it, pretty hooked into it. But during all of that, I met a guy who had seen this newspaper article about this Christian commune thing that was going on in Santa Ana. And he said, yeah, well, let's go talk to this guy that I talked to. And he told me about it. So we went to this guy's house, and his name was Lonnie, not Lonnie Frisbee. He comes in later. And he started talking to us about Jesus and sharing the gospel with us. A really, really nice, solid gospel message. And, we thought, oh, that's really cool, and all of that. And he goes, well, listen, before you guys leave, and this was his apartment, why don't you ask Jesus to come into your heart as your Lord and Savior? That way, if the roof falls in on your head, you die, you'll go to heaven. I mean, that's literally what he said to me. And so me in my simplicity looked up to the ceiling, the acoustic ceiling. I remember it as clearly as it was yesterday, and said, okay, Jesus, come into my heart as my Lord and Savior. And he did. And I knew he did. I felt him. I mean, I got, the goosebumps and all of that stuff. I really felt it. And then we left. I spent 3 days at this commune called the House of Miracles. It was started by Calvary Chapel. It was their first Christian commune. And so 3 days, Bible study, and I had gotten a Bible and all of that. And then kind of a little voice in the back of my head said, well, hey, maybe you can do dope and serve Jesus at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And I went, wonder if I can, And so we left after 3 days, went back to our old friends and everything and our old haunts. And I just basically went back into doing drugs. But the difference is I knew Jesus was real at this point.
There was conviction.
Yeah.
Conviction.
There was no doubt, I knew Jesus was real.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when you talk about drug use and stuff, they think about, oh, you feel so horrible and all this. That wasn't my case at all. I loved it. And it wasn't unpleasurable. I was homeless, but it was cool to be homeless at that time. And so a month later, October 31st, I had dropped acid. We listened to War of the Worlds on the radio, which is kind of funny. And I was up in the middle of the night doing a little thing that I used to do, drawing really intricate little drawings. And a voice spoke in my head. And it was just, it wasn't audible, but it was very clear thought that said, look at the establishment, how phony and hypocritical that establishment is. And I thought to myself, yes, that's absolutely true. And then now look at the hip scene and how just as phony and just as hypocritical the hip scene is. And all of this stuff kind of flashed through my mind of people that I used to sell drugs for, wanting to kill somebody because they got ripped off and stuff like that, and I'm just going, wow. And so that night I said, Lord, I'm coming back to you. I'm coming back. So I went to sleep, which was a miracle in itself because I was stoned and on speed and everything. And I just went to sleep, woke up in the morning and hitchhiked back to the House of Miracles. And just to make a long story kind of short, but the first thing that happened to me, I walked in the door and a young guy with a beard and long hair, and I hadn't met him before, came up and just started talking to me. And I told him where I'd been and what had happened. And his name was Lonnie Frisbee. And he said, well, have you been baptized in the Holy Spirit? And I went, no, I don't know what that is. He goes, come up to my room and I'll pray for you. So he laid his hands on me and we began to pray. I was sitting on the edge of the bed. And as we're praying, and I had my hands up, and he says, if any weird, funny words come into your head, it might be gibberish, but don't be afraid to just speak it out. And so I just started slowly, making these little sounds, and it was like a flood. I felt, and I have to say, it was the fire of God, because I felt it from the top of my head to the tips of my toes, and I was going off. And so for anybody that doesn't believe in tongues, oh well.
Did you even know what that was? Had you ever heard of it before?
No, I think he had explained to me that it was a a heavenly prayer language. You know, it was a way to communicate with God in a heavenly language. And so I laid back on the bed, had my hands up in the air, and for 45 minutes I felt this through my body, literally 45 minutes, and speaking in tongues the whole time. And Lonnie had gone off somewhere else, and so when I got up, I sat up and I went, "Wow, that was crazy."
That was an amazing high.
That was amazing. Yeah. And so I went downstairs. I joined this group. I became a member of this House of Miracles, and we would go to Calvary Chapel when it was 30 people. And they were renting a building up on the Lutheran Church up in Newport Beach. I met this girl who I was pretty attracted to because she really loved the Lord. And through a process of probably a year, 6 months to a year, we started a letter writing because I had moved to Oregon. And we had rented houses in Oregon to start this commune ministry. And at that point, we were not affiliated except by spiritual ways with Calvary Chapel. So I spent 3.5 years in this Shiloh ministry. It grew from one house to over 100 houses throughout the United States and around the world, actually.
Wow.
It was very fundamental in our doctrine and our theology. Our main goal was to live like the early Christians did. So in the process of time, I got married to Michelle. We got married at Calvary Chapel. I was married to her for 12 years, and some pretty terrible things started to happen in our family. And so I left. I couldn't do it. And at the same time, I was starting to fall back into my old ways and walk away from the Lord. And at the same time, Lonnie was kind of involved in this too.
So were you and Lonnie pretty good friends?
We were very good friends.
Okay.
Very, 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 really good friends.
I'm assuming most of our listeners know who he is, but just in case they're not, Lonnie Frisbee is portrayed in the movie Jesus Revolution, and he's the hippie preacher.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you watch that movie, you go, okay, that's the story of my life too, basically.
Yeah, right.
You know, it was a great movie too. I really liked it.
Isn't there also a film called Frisbee?
Yeah, Frisbee, The Life and Death of a Hippie Preacher. That's a documentary.
Yeah.
It's a little darker in tone, only because it deals with the last period of his life, or the middle period, I would have to say, just because he fell into doing drugs and cocaine and homosexuality and all of that.
But he repented at the end. My understanding
He
is
did.
He came back to the Lord.
Yeah. As far as I know, he and I had a falling out about 3 years before he died. When I heard that he had passed away, I was really upset and devastated just because I was never able to reconcile with him. So at that point in time, after I got divorced, I got involved in doing musical theater because I had done it a little bit in high school. So started auditioning for things, and for a good 20 years, I was doing show after show after show after show after show. In the meantime, I had met another lady, beautiful girl named Tammy, and we got married kind of on a whim, but we were married for 8 years. And that's a whole nother story. So, and we broke up after 8 years. And my friend and his wife, my best friend, Gary, and his wife were involved in a subculture of belly dancing. And so I was at their house one night, and I noticed a picture of this girl on the refrigerator. And I'm going, wow, she's cute. And Gary's wife, Christine, said, well, would you like to meet her? You know, she's single. And I went, sure. Yeah, why not? And they said, well, okay, we'll come back and we'll have dinner or something. She probably remembers better than me whether we had dinner or not. But I remember sitting there, and Erin had just come from a belly dancing gig that she had done. And she walked in the door, and I peeked around the refrigerator. It's so funny. So it's just so locked in my memory. I peeked around the refrigerator, and I went, oh, wow, she's very cute. And so we met that night. The next night we went out and had a date, and both of us were just kind of going, wow, just, so that was the beginning of my relationship with this lovely young lady named Erin Almond.
You could have mentioned the 2 kids that you were a single dad to during all that time.
Thank you.
Also,
for reminding me of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when he's going to theater, Allison and
Andrew would spend a lot of their childhood in the green room.
Okay.
And, or running around the theater, causing havoc and stuff during the rehearsals and things like that. Yeah. So
it wasn't a very stable lifestyle for them.
Not too stable, but they both have turned out to be stellar human beings.
Awesome.
They're not Christian. Allison is more of a Christian than Andrew is, but they're both really successful in what they do and good people. So I'm very proud of them. Erin, when I met her, has a daughter, Mariah, and at a certain point when we started living together, Allison, the older child, had left, being rather rebellious, and so Mariah and Andrew kind of connected. It was like us against them, sort of a deal. Sure.
Yeah, right.
Kids against the parents.
All right. So if I'm understanding correctly, Steve, you at this point in your life, Jesus is in the background. You haven't disowned Jesus, but you're not necessarily living for him at this point, right?
And a really interesting thing is I remember being on the beach in Newport Beach. I had moved and lived there for a little while, right on the ocean, and being stoned on cocaine. And then I'm still a Christian, but I'm sitting out there and I'm looking up and just going, Lord, I don't know what's going on in my life right now. I feel really lost and alone, but I know you're still there. Mm-hmm. And so I know at some point you're going to bring me back, because it was pretty dark place where I was. And in time, the Lord brought me back, and she was a part of helping me come back to the Lord, even though at that time she wasn't even a Christian. Erin wasn't even a Christian, but she was very significant in that.
So Erin, this seems like a perfect opportunity for you to introduce yourself. Where did you come from, and what happened when you met Steven?
So I knew of Jesus from when I grew up, and my aunt and uncle, I always looked up to. My parents were divorced, and they were just such wonderful people. And I feel like I knew Jesus through them. I feel like I believed in God, and I knew that Jesus was there, but I didn't read the Bible. I didn't go to church. I didn't follow Christianity. I had a lot of self-esteem issues and abandonment issues. And so when I was 20, the first man who I felt loved me, who said he loved me, I married him. And I got married at 21, had a baby at 22, and got divorced at 23.
Wow.
So didn't have the security of God. And I really felt like I was floundering. Even though I knew he was there, I didn't really know how to access him. Mm-hmm. And I went through a couple of bad relationships. I had one very emotionally abusive long-term relationship. And when that ended, I was seeing a counselor, and he was asking me, look, what do you want? And he had me write down. I said, well, I want to get married. I don't want a boyfriend. I want to get married. So he suggested that I write down 5 things that are must-haves in a future husband, 5 things that would be deal breakers, like, alcoholic, abusive, addict, and 5 things that you would rather have but were negotiable about. And then he said, tell everyone you know that you're looking for a husband. And it was such great advice. So I told everyone. I had a house cleaning service in Laguna Beach for 50 years. And I told all of my clients, everyone I knew, I'm on the hunt for a husband. And it's really, I feel like that is such good advice for anyone, young woman who's looking to get married, rather than just throwing it to chance and meeting someone and seeing if there's an attraction. And then after you're head over heels, then you discuss whether you're on the same page about things. I had these questions, are you interested? How do you feel about marriage? Are you interested in marriage? Do you want children? I wanted a godly man, even though I didn't really have a close connection. I felt like a godly man is going to be less egotistical and self-serving than someone who doesn't know God. And I went over a year period. I went on like a couple of blind dates, a month, and I would sit down and I'd have my questions. How do you feel about marriage? It's like an inner job interview.
Yeah.
And I remember one guy was like, oh, well, you don't, and he was very good looking and kind of attractive, but he's like, I don't think I need a piece of paper to prove that I, love someone. And I'm like, oh, okay, next. And, it was just very practical. And I think it's just was such good advice, and it saves a lot of time. And I had told my friend Christine that, she set me up on several. She loved to be a matchmaker. But then I met Steve for dinner at her house. She said, oh yeah, our friends just got divorced, and he, is not married anymore. I guess the divorce wasn't final, but he had already, everything was going through. So I met Steve at their house, and he had been best man at their wedding. Okay. So it just was, I felt comfortable with him. I didn't feel that he was pressuring me to, go to bed with him right away, or, right. It was just comfortable. And the questions when when I interviewed him with my questions, they were all, pretty much on the same page, and we had children around the same age. So he fell in love with me a lot sooner than I fell in love with him. I was very afraid. So it took me a while to come around, but even though it was a lot of work, it's been just so worth it. And I knew he was a Christian, and I thought, well, that's just great. That makes him the right kind of person. But it didn't really dawn on me that, I'm going to I need to grow in that area also.
I was really gun shy at the time about getting married, and I had told her, I would at some point be interested in getting married. But after 2 failed marriages, in which I feel now I was like the primary candidate or reason that the marriages failed, I really wasn't looking to get married right away.
Yeah. I was afraid to have to go through that again.
Sure.
And I had told him on the first date, right? I'm not looking for a boyfriend.
Yep.
I am looking for a husband. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't ready to get married. And we ended up, after many months, that I ended up moving in with him. And it was difficult. It was 7 years. And I realized, this guy's never going to do what I told him that I wanted a husband. And so it was like 6 years. And I said, look, are we ever going to get married? Because I told you, I don't want a boyfriend. I want a husband. And if you can't marry me, then I need to leave and find the person that wants to marry me. I want a husband. I needed that for my security. So he, took him a while, but he came around and we got married. And into the marriage, I don't know how long it was, 1.5 years or so, he started getting this depression. And he was like, I just feel like I'm a Christian, but I don't go to church. And I really feel like I need something. And I've walked away from God, and I need I need to get back. And I was like, well, cool. Well, let's go to church. To me, I didn't really understand what it meant.
Sure. Yeah.
And so and I encouraged him because I could see that it was making him sad and that he needed that. And I'm sort of I want to help people. I was always friends with the person who had no friends in the class. And so I said, well, let's go. Where do you want to go? Well, I used to go to Calvary. So we went to Calvary Chapel that Sunday, the really big one. And he just broke down blubbering for the entire time we were there. And it kind of like shocked me. I mean, I was like, oh, whoa, what?
Is this what I signed up for?
Yeah, what is going on here? And over the next week, it was like his arms were spread out wide and he was falling off the cliff into Christianity. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I was up on the cliff going, trying to grab him. Wait! As he was diving in, it made me really uncomfortable and scared. And I didn't know what it meant. I was like, gosh, is he going to quit his job and go, wear robes barefoot on the beach? I mean, and it was just terrifying. And because I had these already bad feelings of fear of abandonment. Mm-hmm. And I guess he got these clear.
I was very aware of her uncomfortableness. Mm-hmm. And I was praying. I'm going, Lord, I really want Erin to come to the Lord. Please, I was praying for her and come to you. And the Lord said, you got to slow down, you knucklehead. Not in those words, but it was kind of like that. Hey, get a clue. Uh-huh. Wait for her to catch up. Don't be a crazy person. It's okay if I was single, but I had her. And so, the Lord told me to kind of back off, not walk away from him, but just back off on, just the intensity.
Yeah.
And so, I did that, and
out of curiosity, Erin, one of your requirements for your future husband was that he would be a godly man.
Yes.
What was your internal process going? This is what I asked for. It doesn't seem like you got what you were expecting out of that, though.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a big word. I mean, there's a lot of interpretations of that word godly man.
Yeah. Yes.
And I hadn't been introduced to the Jesus movement. When my mother left church, she really left. And she, didn't want organized religion, just was not something she believed in. Yeah. And so I didn't really know. I wanted someone who knew God. I knew, I knew my Uncle Kermit and how his sense of, I don't know, there was just something about the people that the men that I knew that knew God, he was one of them, were secure, stable, someone that could be trusted, someone that would take care of you, that would sacrifice for you. All those things that the Bible says that Jesus does for us. So when he went, head over heels, that was something unclear to me. I was like, well, wow, I didn't realize that's what that meant.
Yeah, right.
And I'd also been around a lot of Muslims. And so godly men can mean a lot of different things.
Sure. Yeah.
So I didn't really know where he was going. It was completely unfamiliar territory.
Yeah.
So when he did kind of pull back and stopped being, self-absorbed in his, Christian comeback or whatever. And we decided to try to find a church that was smaller, where we could both, he was like, well, will you come to church with me? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so we did. And it took me, it was more of a slow process for me. Mm-hmm. And we found a wonderful little church. And I really see how people can learn about God by seeing the example of Christian people.
Yeah.
And that was sort of what happened through this small church, was seeing all of these wonderful people and seeing the love that they exhibited and all the godly qualities that I knew I wanted. So it was probably 2 years before, and I did feel Steve was really pushing me. And there was a little bit of tension there where I would be just like, you can't force this. This is something I have to do. Yep. I always knew that I wanted that relationship. I think a lot of it is giving up our ego enough to submit to that, to actually realize that it's okay to let go of your ego and believe in God, that there's a higher power. Yeah. And so it happened, and me and another Erin got baptized on the same day. Steve baptized me. And we look at it kind of like I gave him a leg up, and then he in turn turned and gave me a hand and pulled me up with him.
Nice.
So,
I think it's interesting that you ask different people their testimony, and some people have a massive experience like I
yours.
had.
Yeah.
And some people have a very slow, and you can't even pinpoint a date when it actually happened. But, it was, more organic for her.
Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like I knew Jesus, he was there, but I didn't know how to recognize it, or I don't know, just like the veils were lifted off of my heart to the point where I was like, oh, right. And it also, being a Christian, I used to suffer with a lot of depression and anxiety and feelings of not being good enough. And fear. Fear is like my biggest sin. And for a while, I believed like God is Murphy's Law, like out there to punish me. And really learning what Christianity is and believing in it has been such a load off my shoulders. I realize that God's there. He's got my back. He's not Murphy. He's there. It's a security, and it has really alleviated the depression a lot. I still suffer with it a little bit, but there's a lot of issues in my family and stuff that foster that. But I know also that God's in control of everything, and I don't have to fix everything. And it's just alleviated and given the anxiety and given me so much peace. Yeah, and the fear is, almost gone.
I love that you identify fear as a sin.
Yeah, that was good.
Because we don't often think of it that way. Yeah. But faith conquers fear. And if we don't do something in faith, to him who doesn't do what he knows he should do, to him it is sin. That's so fear, choosing fear instead of faith, is a sin.
It is.
God has grace for us. He works through us, and he conquers that fear in our lives. Yeah. Some of us, it's a process. Sometimes it's literally, an instantaneous thing, but that's so good that you came to realize that.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, Steve, what was it like for you to baptize your wife?
It was, I don't know how to say it. It was just great. It was wonderful. Yeah. It was wonderful. I was so thankful to be able to do that for her. And, if you're going to pick pinpoint a time for you to say, oh, this is when it really happened, that probably would be it. Because then at that point, you're identifying, with the death and resurrection of Jesus.
That's right.
You're making a definitive statement.
That's right.
Jesus rose from the dead.
That's right.
Basically.
Hearing your story, because I didn't know your full story, is both of you have come from, ruined relationships, right? For Steven, you started off really strong with the Lord, and you walked away, and there was consequences to that, right? Like you suffered through it. But I love that your story is such a story of redemption.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because, we're going to dig into it in a second,
absolutely.
but God redeemed everything and he's using you guys in a very powerful way.
Yeah.
So let's transition into that, but let's do it organically. You guys have both become Christian. You guys have been married for a while now. How does God lead you?
Well, it was during this period is when I got fired from San Onofre. I was a painter at San Onofre Nuclear Power Plant. Painting was what I did for most of my life. And I got injured on the job. Unknowingly did not report it in enough time. I was in a vulnerable position on probationary status. So, they cooked up some reasons, unsafe work practices and not reporting an injury. That was basically it. I spent 12 years at San Onofre, not one bad report whatsoever. Yeah. But I got called into that office and binga banga bunga, they said, "You're fired." Wow. And I had no recourse because I was on probationary status, having just started to work from Bechtel to working for Southern California Edison. So that's when I went home and I told Erin, I said, I got fired.
And this was quite a shock to you, right, Erin? Like, where were you at in your Christianity?
I was a new Christian.
Okay.
And he had, few weeks before that, when Edison took over the Bechtel painting contracts, he came home and said, "Oh my gosh, Edison's taking it over. That means you're going to be able to quit your house cleaning service and I'm going to get paid vacations and, we're going to be able to pay off the house and all this." And then he said, "Well, I got fired because I didn't report this injury in time." And I did not accept it with grace, to put it lightly. Sure. My fears kicked in again, and I was angry with him and angry, with the whole situation in Bechtel, and it was devastating.
Were you upset with God at all? Because sometimes this is a common occurrence, right? We give our lives to Jesus and we have this perception in our minds in American Christianity that my life's going to be perfect now. Right? There's going to be no trials and no temptations and no hardship. And almost immediately you face one of the hardest situations.
Yeah. Well, it kind of brought back that Murphy's Law belief. Right. Which I feel like that's, the devil tries to use that, flash that at me often. Yeah. And I have to just keep saying, nope, that's not, that's you, that's not him. Mm-hmm. Right. But at that time, I was really devastated and it felt hopeless. And it did feel like, God was just knocking us down for no reason. Right.
But of course, we know now, years later, exactly what God wanted to do.
We couldn't see the big picture.
Yeah. And I had told her, she goes, "What are we going to do?" I go, "I don't know, Erin. I'm still getting paid. I've got workman's comp. I'm on disability. I can do disability. So, we weren't going to be really super hurting for money, but it was a struggle. Sure. And, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." But in the process of getting treated for the injury that I had to wear casts. So I went in and to get my casts done. And
on your hands.
On my hands, and I was just saying to the orthotech, who I actually worked with for a long time later on, I said, how do you get this job? What is this job? It looks really cool, and we talked a lot about it. And she shared with me where to go to school and all of that. And so I told Erin, I said, maybe I could just go back to school and learn how to do this. And so I got into the orthotech program that was in Anaheim, and come to find out, because I have a construction worker's mind, I was really good at it. And it clicked with me right at the very beginning. Yeah. So I was number 2 student in the class, and my instructor, after school was over, had me do my externship at his clinic where he worked.
He was a Christian.
St. Jude. And he was
And
a Christian,
yeah.
strong Christian, yeah.
Awesome.
And so, and then that transitioned into a job. And my real goal was to work for Kaiser because I already knew best benefits,
Best pay.
pay, highest pay. You know, it was a union job, which they're on strike today.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not, but you know. So in the process of time, things came up, and I was able to get into Kaiser in a non-benefited position. That's the way you do it. If you want to work for Kaiser, take a non-benefited position and wait till something opens up.
It was all the way up in Los Angeles
Yeah, I worked
on
in West
call,
LA.
and we were in Costa Mesa. So it was, you know, it could be a 4-hour drive in traffic or 90 minutes if you're going at 5:30 in the morning. But it was worth it.
Yeah. So I actually got to a point where I increased as far as rank among orthotechs and became a surgical assistant in the orthopedic department and spent 6 years assisting in surgery, every possible gory thing you can imagine with bones. And but I loved it. I was just like, that was me, man. I dug it. So in January 12th, was it, of 2010, there was a massive earthquake in Haiti. I'm sure most everybody knows about that.
300,000 people were killed, and there were 70,000 plus traumatic amputations. That traumatic means without a doctor.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So your
Did you say
neighbors.
70,000.
70,000. And like, you know, it's like the Wild West. You don't have tools. They were just, it was like the crushed limbs were infected and they were just removing them. You know, your neighbors would hold you down and remove it.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, it was.
Very crazy.
Yeah, it was horrible. But
So after that occurred, you know, this was like number 5 in my list of things that I wanted to accomplish as an orthotech. Finish school, get a job, work for Kaiser, work in the operating room, and do missionary work, medical missions. I really, really had a heart for that. And so I said to Erin, I said, this is something I can do. You know, so I looked at a few places. University of Miami was going there, but nothing, you know, really came of it. I mean, I tried to get over there, and it didn't happen. And so I met a guy who had a ministry going to Haiti to do medical work in the northwest coast of Haiti. They did prosthetics and surgical stuff. The doctor had provided 2 operating rooms for this mission up there. So I met him, and he came and spoke at our conference and said, well, anybody that wants to go, you know, just contact me, you know, see me after, at lunchtime. And I was, of course, the first one in line. I'm going, I want to go, you know. And then I went home and I went to Erin. I'm going to Haiti. I'm going to Haiti with this group. And she's going, not without me, you are.
Is that really how?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we ended up going in October of 2010. That was our first trip. Was that 2 weeks or just 1 week?
I think that was 1 week.
I think that was a 1 week trip. I assisted the doctor in surgery, and Erin assisted everybody in everything else. Yeah. She was the utility infielder. You know, that's right. I mean, they just had her do anything, you know, check in patients, go get stuff, you know, and everything. And she really turned out to be like one of the most valuable players during that trip. And we got hooked.
Unfortunately, we have reached the end of today's episode, but the story isn't done. Stay tuned for next week's episode as we conclude Steven and Erin's journey of redemption, as they share about their missionary trips in Haiti that eventually led to the formation of a Christian school, an incredible story. And I encourage you to tune back in next Tuesday for that episode. God bless you and have a blessed week.
Thank you for listening to Jesus in My Life. New episodes release every Tuesday. Subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member. If you would like to help our visibility online, consider rating us and posting a review on Apple Podcast. Have an awesome Jesus in My Life story? Contact us at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com.